Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here today to introduce our webinar, Regulated Climate Risk Reporting in North America. My name is Kim LaFrancois, and I'm the ESG and Sustainability Business Development Manager for North America here at SGS. I've been in the testing, inspection, and certification industry for nearly 10 years, working with many different clients throughout various industries. The other speakers joining me today are Suzanne Hopkins-Oldak and Adam Hammis. Suzanne is the head of strategic partnerships at Risilience. Risilience is an award-winning climate risk and sustainability platform, and Suzanne forges strategic collaborations that help businesses navigate global regulations, meet compliance demands, and assess the financial impact of climate change. She previously led the U.S. growth strategy for The Economist's Client Solutions division. Adam is the ESG director here at SGS and has 20 years of experience as corporate ESG and sustainability consultant, author, and instructor. Adam has founded multiple organizations and has an MBA with international education and leadership experience integrating ESG and CSR and sustainability into corporate strategy. He has also taken many different courses to become a competent and effective resource for ESG and sustainability. Today's webinar will cover a short introduction to SGS and Risilience, 3 climate risk regulations for North America, companies affected and specific disclosures required, generic solutions on the market, a value-add solution calculating climate risk with financial modeling, next steps, and Q&A. Please feel free to use the Q&A box on the left side of the screen. We will be distributing the slide deck, the recording, and links to training to all attendees at the end of the presentation today. I'll now pass it over to Adam so we can dive right in.
Thank you, Kim, and thanks to everyone for being on the call today. I know you have plenty of things to do, so I will not give too much. Hopefully you know who SGS is, but we are the world's leading testing, inspection, and certification company. We've been around for a long time, and we have boots on the ground literally around the world. We offer a ton of services that differentiate ourselves from the market, including sustainability. Last but not least, I work in sustainability assurance, which is really looking at third-party independent verification of data and claims. And sustainability is nothing new to SGS. It's been embedded in our company from the CEO to the ground floor for a very long time. If you'd like to go look at our reporting. And we've actually sat on many of the working groups that developed the standards over the years across the market, and which allows us to be one of the first certifying, verifying, or assurance bodies to check those. We are recognized by a lot of the exact same agencies and scoring rating agencies that our clients are. That's how we stay up to speed on all the things. We also are rated very highly by them. We were recently Time's 6th most sustainable company in the world, including the best tech company to work for. And just before we jump in, giving you a little bit about us, kind of speed through that, really looking at what is your organization's #1 business driver for climate risk reporting, because we're going to tell you general information, the regulatory market, but it really depends on you and knowing your own drivers. There's no off-the-shelf solutions. So is it California SB 261 and or 253, depending on your size? Is it CSDS out of Canada with the IFRS S1 and S2 standard? Is it CSRD coming out of the European Union? Is it just that you expect increasing regulation, but you're not under any regulation now, or some other driver? So I'll give you a few seconds to submit that, but really just getting you a sense of your company's specific situation. We are SGS, a global, publicly traded, very large firm. And so we essentially are covered by all of them. We have to report to CSRD, CSDS, California, and many, many more in South America, in Eastern Asia. And so for us, it's quite extensive. But for you, it might just be one, or it might be none. So I'll give it a few more seconds to let folks submit, and then we'll just see what the group looks like today. All right, so the majority here, a lot of it just expecting increasing regulations to continue, and then a lot of folks, California SB 261 is leading the way. We'll talk about all of these in a little more specifics, but let's talk about North America. climate risk regulation, there's three main buckets that we're going to talk about. And as you know, there's a shifting economic and political winds. But in the USA, specifically California, SB 261 is the lower threshold, 500,000 in revenue, and doing business in California is the climate rule. And that survived the November election, which a lot of the federal rules, at least two of them disappeared, which people expected that to happen. But as often does, there are additional proposed rules now in 5 and probably more states to be expected, where Colorado, Illinois, New Jersey, New York, and Washington have proposed the exact type of regulation that's in California. So you often see that why people expect regulation to either continue or increase is that there's always that flux and balance of if it's federal, the states sort of take a back seat, and if the federal goes away, sometimes the states step up. In Canada, it typically comes from, the rest of the world uses IFRS, the International Financial Reporting Standards, and the IFRS Foundation, and S2 of the two standards that came out last year, S1 and S2. S2 is specifically focused on climate-related disclosures. And so while Canada it's not mandatory, which kind of people expected it to be last year, it came out, it's not going to be mandatory until at least 2028. But still people see that and believe it's going to be mandatory in 2028 and are preparing for it. And in Canada, it's called CSDS, but in IFRS applies all around the world. And it is a financial materiality assessment or a single materiality assessment standard, specifically more from an investor standpoint, whereas the European Union, the CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, that is a double materiality assessment. So both from an investor standpoint and from a more sustainability standpoint, what people say, what is the impact materiality of this, your impact as a company on the environment and society? And I would also point to China having their own version of CSRD, which is not confusing at all because it's called CSDS, but it is a double materiality regulatory standard for broad sustainability, which includes climate. And while the European Union, essentially CSRD from EU, kind of got some of the teeth taken out of it recently with the new omnibus bill, that China is actually ramping up and becoming more aggressive than the EU, which that was maybe not what something had on their bingo cards, even a year and a half ago. So what does that mean is that besides regulations, you have these other drivers that you want to think about because there are these international, regional, and state-specific regulations. We do have something that fluctuates a lot less than political regulation is sustainability and supply chain ratings. So what you'll see is these rating agencies that the larger organizations who are international, who often, no matter what changes somewhere in the world, they have to do sustainability reporting. And investors and creditors are often using those ratings to make buy, sell, and lend decisions, is the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, MSCI, ISS, Sustainalytics, and now even more specific, which are kind of broader, if you're not publicly traded, which the top 4 only apply to mostly publicly traded companies, that the faster growing platforms are CDP, which is just a climate risk and reporting platform, which has 23,000 reporting companies, where EcoVadis is an ESG and sustainability rating platform, and it's growing with hockey stick growth. I think 130,000, it might actually be at 150,000 today. It continues to expand, and that's because large brands either mandate or request kindly that all of their suppliers report through that platform. So hundreds or thousands of companies might join in a wave just because one larger company wants to use that tool. So that's another major driver besides regulation. I click forward and there we go. So a quick question, has your organization attempted a climate risk report? Because at the fundamental level, like with SB 261 in California, even if you're at that lower threshold of 500 million revenue versus $1 billion, the first, and often in any regulation, the first requirement is that you do some sort of risk assessment around climate change. And so if you have or have not done one, hopefully you'll know. And the yes or no or kind of tongue-in-cheek answers, what's COP29? Why should I care? That is the annual conference of the parties on climate change. And it's always the big event at the end of the year when we see where the nations are, where the winds are blowing and what kind of commitments are being made. But yes, I would select it as SGS. We've done a climate risk report. We're actually going to do an even more robust version of that this year, given the changes in CDP and the algorithm, which some of you might understand if you're reporting to CDP. I'll give it a few more seconds to let people submit and then see where we're at. So a lot of folks have not done it. Some people say, what's COP? I hear you. Google it. It's a fascinating read. And then yes, 19%. So it's a good mix, but it doesn't surprise me that no, especially since a lot of folks were just expecting regulation on this call. If you have not been regulated yet, then you likely have not done a climate risk report. But just so you know, that's the entry level typically. And actually, I would argue, has the most value for your company if you know where the risks are and why you would even start doing climate reporting in the first place. So let's look at the bill. So if you look at California, SB 253 is across the top and SB 261 is across the bottom. The 500 million revenue threshold is for those companies doing business in California. And what you'll see is the very first step. And now it got delayed. It was supposed to be in effect, I think initially it was this year. It keeps getting pushed back. Now folks are fair, especially after the election, the final pushback, what is expected is effective in 2027, which means for 2026 data, you'll have to have a climate-related financial risk report and then put that report somewhere online for the public and your stakeholders to see. If you're a $1 billion organization in revenue, then you have to disclose scope 1 and 2 emissions, report that to an actual agency, and then has to have the limited assurance by a third party, independent third party. And then it continues on where every 2 years, you would have to do an updated climate risk report online if you're for SB 261, but if you're a larger company, you will eventually have to add scope 3 emissions, which is your supply chain emissions. Those don't need assurance until 2030, when it's actually going to increase to reasonable assurance for scope 1 and 2 emissions and limited assurance for scope 3 emissions. So the expected impact is about 5,300 companies at the 253, the larger company level, and 261 roughly for SB 261, about 10,000 plus companies. The violation, the max penalty for not disclosing, if you're required, is $500,000 per year. And like I said, after the election, this should be what is expected to be the final timeline across the top. Then just a little bit on the others that I mentioned, and this is more historical to think of TCFD and the alignment of all these standards. This is why we have more confidence than ever, because there's been a lot of changes over the past even decade. But above the dotted line is the financial materiality, ESG, kind of pure investor-driven standards, whereas sustainability, when you add in impact materiality, typically we call that sustainability. Those are GRI, the UN Development Goals, as well as the CSRD, and now the China CSDS. But above, it was the Integrated Reporting Foundation, SASB, TCFD. They all became the Value Reporting Foundation, started integrating together, and then were absorbed just about a year and a half ago into the International Financial Reporting Standards Board. And like I mentioned, that's basically every developed country in the world except for the US that uses GAAP accounting still. They rolled out what's called S1 and S2, and that has been adopted jurisdictionally kind of around the world, location by location, and Canada's is not confusing at all, also called CSDS, just like China, but that is definitely relevant for us in North America. So Canadian companies are definitely looking at that, and they just call it CSDS 1 and CSDS 2, but it's the equivalent of IFRS S1 and S2, and even more confusing, some people call IFRS ISSB S1 and S2, because the subcommittee that came over from the Value Reporting Foundation. So we try to be more aligned and simplified, but we find a way to use the same different acronyms for the same standards. So I apologize on behalf of our entire industry sometimes. So that's where they come from. And if you want to think about materiality threshold and why it matters, these above the dotted line, investor driven, it's pure, it's financial materiality. That's what they call ESG. And it is what is material to your business from a bottom line standpoint. It is what is the ecological and social impacts on your business from these issues, not the other way around. So when you start to look at, how did TCFD, it became IFRS S2, and now it's CSDS2 in Canada, and it's all about climate, where you're going to have these slides. So you can just click and download the standard if you want. But essentially, all publicly traded companies in the majority of the world, not the USA, but they are aligned and agnostics with GAAP. Ever since June 2023, these apply to publicly traded companies, and it's going to be the expectation. Although in Canada, specifically, as I mentioned, it's not mandatory until at least 2028. So that's the change. And if you want to know what's in them, TCFD essentially started, and it's just non-prescriptive 4 categories of types of reporting. What is your governance around climate? What's your strategy around any climate risks? Strategy is what are your climate risks? Risk management is how are you going to address those? And then what metrics and targets are you using and developing to track success? What happened when IFRS came out is essentially evolved TCFD to integrate governance into not just climate governance, have it be separate, but integrate it into your overall governance for the company. And then strategy got really fleshed out to have very specific subcategories, and metrics and targets gave very specific guidance on disclosures as well. So it just basically ramped up what TCFD already was and provided specific guidance. And then IFRS and CSDS, when it got converted into Canadian jurisdiction, is that they have, here's some examples. The cross-industry metrics categories down here actually provided bullet point types of cross-industry metrics that you should be looking at. So it's not different. They all play well together, but TCFD became more advanced with IFRS, and now it's very specific in the Canadian market under CSDS, but they're all very much related. You can get a copy of every single one of those from the slides. And then when you go into adding impact materiality, which often people refer to as double materiality, then you're saying like, what's good for the planet? What's good for society? How is your company impacting the world around it? That's more aggressive and includes more things in your materiality assessment. But that's things below the line. Like the most common until now is really the European Union CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. But like I said, with the omnibus bill, that really got scaled back. And now people are looking at the Chinese version of CSDS, and that is more aggressive and also a double materiality threshold. So that gives you a sense of what's pushing the market, and then what are the solutions. So if you're going to look at just step 1, a climate risk report, an assessment for your company, there's a generic option, which a lot of folks go with. I'm not going to lie, but it's fast and cheap. It's just an off-the-shelf sort of a narrative that can be copy and pasted, and with utmost respect, that is basically how it feels. There is no supply chain mapping, there's no financial modeling of risk, and there's very little value add to the business by approaching it that way, except cost, saving money. But it does make that entire exercise a cost. It's not providing a value and a return on investment. So what would a value add approach look like if you look in the marketplace? And I promise I have looked, and I was happy to come across our next speaker at the, I think, Sustainable Future of Food and Bev 2 years ago in Minneapolis when we met. So I was very happy to do this because it does take more time to invest to get a return on investment, but to include supply chain mapping, to actually model the financials along with those risks, and to make that actually add value to the business, because it does give you incredible material information that you can base decisions off of, and that shapes the way you do business now and in the future versus the other version. So from a value add perspective, we really wanted to show at least one example and introduce you to Suzanne Hopkins from the company Risilience. And I want to hand it over and just thank Suzanne for joining us today and being on this webinar.
Amazing, Adam. Thank you. Thank you so much to you and Kim and SGS Really excited to be part of the discussion. As Kim highlighted, Suzanne Hopkins, I head up strategic partnerships at Risilience. While my background is primarily in media marketing, communications, etc., I have been immersed in the world of climate risk for the last 4 years working with Risilience. So really excited to be included, grateful to SGS, and look forward to telling you a bit more about how Risilience helps companies satisfy these evolving climate risk regulations and align sustainability more directly with financial performance. So looking forward to the discussion. I can start here with a little background on Risilience, which is a SaaS platform. It's built on research developed over decades at the University of Cambridge's Center for Risk Studies. We've received validation from leading third-party analysts like Verdantix for a very comprehensive approach to risk management, and we work with a variety of different global companies to help them satisfy the emerging regulations and ultimately gain a strategic advantage as they're looking at how the world could decarbonize. So today I'll walk you through our approach, highlight how it drives value across businesses, and I'll also share a few publicly available samples of reporting. So happy to just kind of dig in here. This first slide is really a summary of our approach. And the platform itself was created to align with the TCFD framework that Adam has highlighted. We consider that like the original foundation for all climate risk standards. And so you can see it weaved through all of the different emerging regulations that are all in a kind of different state right now, with a few mandatory as Adam had highlighted. But the platform is designed not just to meet kind of the business need today, but really change as the business changes and keep pace with the evolving regulations. And we do that in kind of 3 parts, as you can see on the screen. First, over to the left is we create a company's digital twin. And we do this by combining both the commercial and operational footprint of the company, bringing together your financial data, your market breakdown, key facilities, supply chain, and we combine that with your GHG footprint. For many of the companies we work with, it'll be the first time that they have a view of their business like this. And we use that foundation to create a earnings value for the company. And then we're able to shock that digital twin with the environmental scenarios that you see in the center of the screen. And we cover both physical risks as well as transition risks, which is kind of the leading regulatory standards, is combining both of those scenarios. And we do that to get a financially quantified result. And you can see that result over on the right-hand side in terms of financial impact or the earnings value at risk for a company. And the beauty of this is that you're in the driver's seat of your results. You have an assessment that you can sit down with your team, looking at the different scenarios, looking at the different internationally recognized emissions pathways, to better understand what your short, mid, and long-term risks might be. But then you're able to apply your own business intelligence and diagnose where the risk is coming from and really set up strategically to decide how you want to communicate that risk and also how you want to manage it moving forward, based on the specific needs of your company. So that's the kind of quick version of our approach. And I'll kind of take you through a very quick introduction to some of the nuance of the models that go into the platform. So first here is the physical risk assessment, which again is a key part of most regulatory compliance issues. You can see here that clients have the ability to rank their vulnerability based on likelihood and severity of extreme weather events like floods, heat waves, windstorms, droughts, etc. And the climate hazards expanding. So we're making sure to add and keep pace and keep ahead of what those regulatory requirements are going to be. And we also give a specific view of the financial impact due to this disruption. So looking at disruption to production or disruption to supply chain or even asset damage. So you have a quantified view of looking at the impacts. But the kind of beauty is that not only do we have the physical risks in the platform, but we can take those financial results and combine them with a view of what a company's transition risks might be. And you can see here how Risilience has kind of responded to what the regulatory demands are. And we've broken the transition risk model into kind of 6 categories. So looking at how policy shifts like carbon taxation could impact your business, changing consumer behavior, disruptive technologies as more low-emitting carbon technologies become available. We look at liability from climate litigation. We look at investor sentiment, so the access to capital in different scenarios, as well as the reputation risk from climate change for your company. And to get a really helpful steer on what the financial impacts can be from the variety of these risks, we take into account your industry, your geography, your business model, GHG footprint, so you can anticipate what the different challenges might be and really identify areas of risk specific to your business as the global economy starts to decarbonize. So, this really can illuminate both the risk as well as the opportunity in that transition. So this financial modeling is definitely what businesses are craving and businesses need in order to both respond to the kind of regulatory demands in the short term, but also keep a very consistent and credible and auditable way of evolving this process inside organizations. So we see this, this combination of physical and transition risk, as well as the quantification of a company's risk, as having a variety of different value add, as Adam put it. By having that digital twin sit in the center of your business, not only do you have a reusable system of record that aligns different cross-functional teams, but you also have audit-ready outputs that help you keep pace with the kind of changing regulations, but also how your business is going to change. We realize that none of this is static, but you have to be prepared in order to communicate with key stakeholders about what risks are, where the opportunities are, and ultimately what your business is doing to capitalize on them. So the resilience analytics do a really unique job in getting both regulators and investors on board to see that you've assessed, you have an understanding of where your risks are, and you're able to make more informed decisions about capital investment to really protect and start to grow your business value. So whether you're just kind of getting started from a compliance standpoint, or you've kind of been doing some version of reporting, maybe not all the pieces are adding up, Risilience is a great value add driver that help you establish that foundation and really start to manage risk more efficiently. So I want to take you through a couple of examples. And again, these are all publicly available samples from different client disclosures. So you can get a sense of how resilience analytics is being applied. On the left is an example from Coca-Cola European partners, and they're specifically highlighting the use of our analytics in terms of identifying what's material for their business across both physical and transition risk. What's powerful here is while they're not disclosing specific amounts, they're using a traffic light kind of band to highlight under different climate scenarios what's financially material for their organization, to meet the compliance standards of financial reporting. Kind of one further into the right is an example from Nestle, and you can see there more operational insights as Nestle looks at their exposure to climate hazards using a more granular location-specific set of data to analyze projected changes in yields for their top ingredients. Things like coffee and cocoa, very material for their business, helping them understand and start to adapt to risk across their supply chain. The next example over is Halion, and they're going a step further, in the assessment, not just pointing to risk, but also incorporating opportunities, noting that they've identified an increased demand for more sustainable products, specifically, I think, in their oral healthcare business, which is, a significant value add when you're doing your transition risk modeling and ultimately unlocking growth strategies for your team in the near term. So a great example there. And then the last one on the right from Burberry really pinpoints how they've identified kind of the 5 areas that are most material, but also have gone the extra step to obtain limited assurance on their climate scenario analysis, which demonstrates just the credibility and the compliance in their annual reporting. So all of these are kind of great examples of the foundation that then lets you be kind of reporting ready for whatever different disclosure type might get thrown at you. And we do think that there's a kind of an urgency around establishing this credible framework so that you have a process that aligns with your business goals and your financial goals before you're forced into some type of compliance exercise. So I'll share one final example here that's a great example of kind of getting started early and, kind of getting the process going. And this one is ASOS, which is a UK-based fashion retailer. And they're really doing just that. They've recently published their first quantified climate scenario analysis in their annual report. And they're being very transparent about kind of what goes into the process. And, they're acknowledging that there's a lot of uncertainty, especially around climate change and regulations, which I think everyone on this call would agree. But the most important thing is to get started. So their report emphasizes that this is an iterative process and they'll be refining their approach over time. It's kind of built in, it's part of the plan. But for the first round, they've disclosed both transition and physical risks. It's a little hard to read here, but you'll have access to the slides. And ASOS has really highlighted their exposure to shifts in consumer demand preference, as years and different emissions pathway evolve, there's the likelihood for an increasing demand for more sustainable products. So how are they managing that from a risk and opportunity standpoint? But they've also looked at a variety of other transition risks, including policy change, investor sentiment, liability, and they've done it as kind of the regulators are asking for across multiple different emissions pathways and across different time horizons. And then in addition to the transition risks, they're also highlighting the physical risk of climate change to their business, looking at the impact of how climate events might impact their key supplier locations, kind of the impact on raw material availability that they're looking at. So overall, a great example of a company beginning to establish a really structured, financially grounded process and using it to build a more resilient business over time. So I'd love to just kind of leave us with a couple of thoughts, kind of going into the discussion here. I think first and foremost is Risilience is a great partner to, bringing that financial rigor to the climate risk modeling process, supporting both the compliance and the strategic value that goes into this process. It's important to get started and know that things will evolve over time. We're working with clients now from California, which is very much moving forward, to Australia, which is already mandatory. So really, the sooner you get started, the better, and you'll be in a better position to evolve from there. And as the ASOS example shows, the work creates value beyond just reporting. It really is about building that smarter, more resilient, future fit company. And, despite the kind of disorderly, or maybe even because of the disorderly way the world is likely to decarbonize, it's important to get in the driver's seat and kind of take hold of what your business needs. So I think that's kind of it for me, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Suzanne. Really quick question to check and see how people are following along. What, if anything, does your climate program need help with? So if you're looking for climate risk reporting or greenhouse gas accounting, if you're moving into the reporting itself, and then as you evolve, you might want verification services if third-party assurance is required, or I would suggest just the value from getting at least a one-time verification to build the internal confidence in your team. Or have you even moved on to greenhouse gas, target setting, whether it's science-based targets or net zero, or some other need that we haven't even considered yet. But like I said, not every company is the same. You should not have an off-the-shelf solution based on just something another company is doing or something we tell you, but to know where you are in your journey. Climate risk reporting, like I said, often comes very early on. Certainly when regulations are involved, it's one of the earliest regulated actions, but it could be accounting, verification, or target setting. If you do have other, feel free to put it in the Q&A box. I will be coming back. I've seen a couple questions already in the Q&A box that I'll answer at the end, but I'll give folks a second to respond. Like I mentioned, SGS on ourselves, we've done climate risk reporting, but we're kind of taking the next step. Much like the examples you just saw, it's iterative. We're going even more deep with the financial modeling. And we've done greenhouse gas accounting for a very long time, including verification, because we're a verification body and we have set targets. I believe we had science-based targets for scope 1 and 2 for a long time, and now we are adding scope 3 into that mix as well. So if you have, I'll give you a few more seconds and then I'll hit next. And a lot of needing help with. So if you're in the 75%, I'd love to know the other, because I see 25% say other. What other activities around climate do you need help with? And feel free to put that in the Q&A box. But I'll just show you very quickly that we can help kind of along your journey. So if you think from left to right, in the green is climate, and it's very much similar in strategy to readiness to assurance. We help along the way. We're often not necessarily, we don't do as much in the consulting business as because we are a third-party assurer. We're highly qualified, but we're really, if you look at training, risk assessment, footprint calculations, then we get into things like CDP climate ratings, pre-verification, limited and reasonable verifications of your carbon footprint. And along that path, it does mirror and kind of parallel exactly what ESG and sustainability reporting. And I will say the reason why we have Risilience on is we partner, and our auditors and assurance providers use Risilience in a lot of settings. Sometimes, depending on the scope of the company, it might be Risilience doing the work, or it might be some of our auditors, but we'd be happy to help you using Risilience. And as we're on this page, I had a really good question, 2 of them. So Brian said, would you illustrate how CSRD overlaps and or contrasts with North American regulations? So I'll say that North America is like US and Canada differ. CSRD mirrors IFRS S1 and S2 pretty well, except IFRS in Canada is a single materiality, just financial materiality assessment, whereas CSRD is more robust and it's a double materiality, adding in impact materiality. In the US, it's very limited to just climate disclosures, and that is a subset. So climate is an environmental KPI within a larger materiality assessment, but CSDS and CSRD are broad sustainability. So it's environmental, social, and governance are all considered and then prioritized. So climate is not only a very prominent, but often the #1 environmental issue, and it's often the #1 sustainability issue above all others. It's certainly the most regulated around the world, but that's how it fits. In North America, US is pretty specific on climate disclosure, whereas Canada has a lower materiality threshold, but still a broad sustainability reporting framework, just like CSRD. So I hope that helps, and type in more questions if it didn't help. Andrew also says, for SB 253, is the $1 billion total or just California revenue? It's total revenue for the company and whether you do business in California, not whether you do $1 billion of revenue in California specifically. So that's a great question. And Brian said, so if we cover CSRD, we also meet any requirements. Almost assuredly, there might be some differences in how you technically report the data, but CSRD is the most robust approach. It's going to mirror China as well, but a double materiality approach. There is some like EU protocols and things about how it's called the EU taxonomy. It's just sometimes a translation of how they want you to, disclose versus what the KPI, like they call it the technical protocols, how the KPI, it's usually just translating that same number into a different, but it's the same data. Yes is the answer. If you cover CSRD and you're CSRD compliant, you would almost certainly meet the North American requirements because CSRD is the most robust threshold for a materiality assessment that you can do. I mentioned at the bottom just that the benefits of assurance, if you haven't considered this, often folks first jump to regulations or improving their ESG rating or confidence. Customers and stakeholders, investors are telling you have to, but do not overlook the simplicity of the internal confidence that your team needs to have in that you're measuring, managing, defining your KPIs in the appropriate way according to standards, even if it's just a pre-verification one time. I strongly suggest that you do it because, as we saw earlier in the survey or the poll question, most folks here were saying they expect increasing regulation. If you're not required to do third-party assurance today, but 7 years from now you are, and you waited 7 years, and you get a third-party assurance and you found out that your calculations, your methodology, how you define your KPIs was not correct, those 7 years are now in question and can't be used as your baseline. Or you have to go back and adjust 7 years worth of data, which is sometimes impossible, sometimes very difficult and painful. So getting a pre-verification, getting verification one time with a certificate or a statement of opinion gives you that internal confidence that you can be assured that you're doing things correctly. And so it's a little self-serving. I know that's our job, but I'm telling you from experience, we don't want people to get into that situation. There's very little you can do to go back in history and fix some of those things, especially when you mean well and your team has been giving it its best effort. It's really unfortunate when things like that happen. Last I'll say is SGS has amazing Academy courses. You can go to SGS Academy all the time. There is a 22% off discount right now for Earth Day that lasts until April 29th that Mona wanted to make sure that I told everybody. So go to SGS Academy. There is that deal going on. And we have courses on greenhouse gas specifically, on CDP, on quantification. There's a 2-day intro course. There's also a 4-day verifier course. It's very popular, especially if you're on the verification team internally, or if you want to get into the business of verifying and come work for us someday. But we have sustainability governance, sustainability execution, sustainability reporting courses, as well as a course, a workshop on EcoVadis. And you can actually find for free, go to YouTube. We have a fundamentals of ESG and sustainability performance, 50-minute course just to watch, and it kind of gives you the rundown of everything you need to know, unless you want to dive deeper. So SGS Academy, you'll get these slides, but here is the QR code that takes you to that discount. And then, like I said, our YouTube channel, a lot of people don't know, we have over 100 hours, almost 200 videos now, hundreds of hours of content that is for free, technical webinars, live recordings, facility tours, all kinds of amazing things. And so if you're not following us, check it out. And then I would just say, I'm here for questions. If you want to work on a climate risk report, reach out to Kim, and we will partner with Suzanne to get you whatever kind of service you need, depending on the scope. And we'd love to partner with you on a climate risk report, as well as if you move on to do in-depth reporting and or assurance. We can't do both, but we can either do assurance for you or the accounting, but we can't do both. That's the world we live in, for very good reason. but I will open it up now to additional questions. If you want to put them in the Q&A, we'll stick around for a little bit, but that's it for
Awesome.
us.
Thanks, Adam. A question has come in. This one will be for Suzanne. The creation of a digital twin looks like a complicated process. Can you describe a bit more about how that actually works?
Absolutely. Thanks, Kim. And there really is no one approach. We really start with what the assessment is looking to drive, and we make sure that we work and help the companies, our partners, identify where the information sits in their company and provide a really easy map to kind of secure what's needed. But I would also say, we've leveraged publicly available data for the digital twin. We have supplemental data that's available for the digital twin, proxy data if needed for GHG emissions. So, the more that you're enriching with first-party data, the better. And all the projects we've worked with, we've never had a problem getting the data that we've needed.
Awesome. Thanks, Suzanne. And just a general question for both of you. I know we talked about regulatory requirements, but can you guys provide any further insights into what you're seeing in the market?
Suzanne, I'll let you go first if you want.
Thank you. Sure. Very happy to. I would say first, we definitely are seeing this as kind of a moment where that financially quantified insights are leading many discussions. How fast should we be moving to decarbonize our business? What investments should we be making? Where's the best kind of ROI for how we decarbonize? So much more focus on the actual business needs as opposed to, just these are our targets, how are we going to get there? But I would say, there are these regulatory pressures that are, continuing to force companies to think about those decarbonization plans. For many people with the CSRD omnibus, I think it's an opportunity, as Adam had highlighted, to, really look at the work that you're doing and make sure that it's built to last, because it was a very complex, set of regulations that I think most companies didn't know how to respond to. So the time now is being used to really kind of get the house in order for more rich responses. But yeah, I think it's certainly an interesting time to be working in this space and having conversations about bringing sustainability more closely aligned to actual business needs and business goals.
And I would just add that what we expect is additional states, typically the blue states, come out and add regulation that just solidifies it across, in the US specifically, what I'm mentioning. It'll be interesting. I think Canada's into an election year, so that no reprieve from politics. We'll all get to keep watching specifically to see what happens. But that always, we just wait and see. But the obvious thing is that it went from California to now 5 additional states, and we expect additional blue states to go there. And then Sunil, I was going to say, we're looking more at like China. Again, it really depends on your regional scale. If you're an international global company, that you should be looking at not only South America, East Asia, but the Chinese sustainability standards are quite popular for a reason now. People are, I'll tell you, when we first went to look, they were in Chinese. So our first step was trying to get them an English version of them, so we didn't guess at what we were seeing. But that's really just like keeping a broad sense. It does shift from time to time, but the overall direction is increasing regulation. The type of regulation tends to be consistent: climate risk reporting, scope 1, 2, and 3 data, some sort of target setting, if it's net zero, if it's science-based targets, and then what level of third-party assurance. Is it required? Is it limited? Is it reasonable? There really isn't anything outside of that when it comes to what is climate reporting. And so those are the things that we expect to see, and additional states definitely on the horizon. Sunil says, I believe Adam answered this question, but was not clear. 1 billion revenue requirement, is it 1 billion revenue generated in California, USA? No. So no, Sunil. It is, do you generate 1 billion of revenue at all as a company? And are you doing business at all in California? Two separate things. It is not, are you generating 1 billion in revenue from the state of California? So hopefully that helps. All right. Well, I can stick on for more, but this is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks both for your insights. It does look like that covers everything for today, but please don't hesitate to reach out directly to myself, Adam, or Suzanne if you've got any questions. A big thank you to Suzanne and Adam for all of this wonderful information, and thank you all for your time. Hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Check.